You're listening to the TeenTix Arts Podcast, or TAP for short.
Here on TAP, we explore how teens and young people are engaging with music. What is the context that drives our local Seattle music scene?
What, how, why, and where are teens listening?
And maybe most importantly, how can you be involved?
We conduct interviews, dive into history, and more. I'm Triona.
And I'm Olivia.
And today, we're going to be discussing our favorite youth and smaller artists in the Seattle area. What's it like being a young person in music, and what are some barriers they face? And how can we as listeners best support them?
We also sent some artists interview questions to really gain some insight on the experience of a youth musician, and we're going to share their interview responses here. So, what is the significance of youth artists in music specifically?
Youth involvement in any sort of culture is the driving force that keeps things current, that keeps things changing and growing. I think, it's really important to have youth involved in artistic aspects of culture like music, because it's really important to give them that space for self-expression and for, learning about themselves, understanding themselves through the art that they're creating.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so inspiring to see younger people creating music because it really just shows how music is for everyone, and music making isn't strictly limited to just adults with money. And seeing more and more youth musicians can help inspire so many other young people to really create their own art and music.
Yeah. Now, well, it's fun to discuss our own views on youth and music. Let's hear from some actual youth musicians on what their experiences have been like.
Yeah, so we reached out to 4 local youth artists, and one of them was Jack Frost. I know him from school. He's in my math class. I heard from a friend that he produced his own music, and I thought that was really interesting. I was like, I should go check him out. He is self-described underground rap, but I can almost sense traces of hyperpop, maybe even a little bit of Blade influence there. And when I first heard his stuff, it was kind of hard for me to categorize it because it was so chaotic, but I really gravitate towards that sort of chaotic sound. His production is really good. He told me he's been doing this for a while now, and I can definitely tell he's really mastered what he's trying to go for with the genre he's in. And I really hope he takes off.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the description of chaotic. I think it's when I first listened to some of his stuff, I really, it made me think of this is like a soundscape with rhythm, and it's all, heavily modified, very electronic, sort of bordering cyberpop almost. It's not necessarily the kind of music I would listen to normally, but it's really unique and cool, and it really clearly took a lot of work to put together. I can tell how much effort and care was put into making this as cool as it is.
Mm-hmm. Especially with electronic music production that can get very time-consuming and irritating, but he put a lot of work into it. And here is a clip of one of my favorite songs from him, The Girl from 2021.
Send me out a picture and you crop it. Anything you need, yeah, baby, yeah, I got it. She wants in my heart and just lock it. Baby, please let me, yeah, baby, please just stop it. We're back.
Yeah. Another artist that we interviewed is Aliana Gray, who is a Totem Star artist, who is actually the person who creates the music that we use in this podcast.
Yeah, I love Aliana Gray. Love the dreamy vibe. They have their self-described dream R&B, which I feel fits perfectly. And the song Periwinkle Drops. It's more of a spoken word actually. It's a call to action song about race and police brutality that I found really stunning.
Yeah, I think another one of their sort of more spoken word pieces, it's called To the Next Beautiful Queer I Match With on Tinder, which I immediately was drawn to just from the title. I was like, oh, I have to listen to this. It's, it's sort of bordering rap, but it's definitely feels like spoken word poetry with music behind it. It's sort of it's swirling. It's like fog in the forest or the tide going out. It's got so much just ethereal energy. It's really stunning.
Yeah. Here is a clip from her song Real.
She
She's traumatized. I can see it in her eyes, and I know I should walk away.
We also interviewed Chloe Bilstad, who is a good friend of mine and of Josh, who is one of our off-mic teammates this episode. I have been lucky enough to see her perform live. She doesn't have any music released on any streaming platforms yet, but she is currently in the process of making that happen. She's got some great, indie pop energy. There's a lot of rock influence in her music, especially in some of the bass lines. It varies pretty widely, which I appreciate. She's definitely got her slower sort of bedroom pop stuff, and then she's got some faster, more punchy rock stuff. So this is a clip from her own favorite song that she's written called The People.
And the last artist that we reached out to is an artist named Knight. Now, Knight worked with Xandra, our other off-mic teammate, in her upcoming short film. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, when I first listened to Knight's music, I really immediately was drawn to the sort of dreamlike piano. I think the whole thing feels kind of like clouds in a night sky. It's very haunting. And so here's a clip from their song called Ariel.
So now we're going to be going over these artists' interview responses. We first asked them sort of what artists inspire their work. And I loved Aliana Gray's response, which was to be completely honest, my friends inspire my work. They constantly inspire me and push me to be great, and I love supporting them and watching them grow. And Jack Frost had a similar response, saying that he works with a lot of his influences and people he considers friends. I think when we think of this question, like what artists inspire your work, we think of, these artists, maybe mainstream, maybe not, that we don't really have any personal connection to or we don't know very well. At least for me, that's what I think when I was drafting this question. But to hear them say that they just get inspired from their friends, I'm like, that is so cool. And like that bond between like music and friendship, it's just so admirable to see. I'm so glad that they're getting inspired by people that they know.
And I think, being able to draw inspiration from your own life and from people that you have like a real connection and relationship with, I think that makes it so much more like significant when that is where you're taking inspiration from. Because, right, like you can be inspired by like Taylor Swift or something, and like that's all well and good. And it's not to be like, a diss to anybody who is inspired by Taylor Swift, like she's popular for a reason. And I absolutely think, it's great that there are big artists who can be such an inspiration to people. But I also think it's a really unique sort of power that comes from taking inspiration from people that you have a really personal connection to.
For sure. The second question we had was, what is your biggest struggle as a youth and upcoming artist? I was really curious to hear about this, just because there are so many things that upcoming artists face, and especially youth artists face.
So I really liked Knight's response. I think they really, encapsulated a lot of what the struggles are. What they said is, I think a lot of youth and upcoming artists struggle with simple things like just being themselves in a world that has mountains of non-constructive criticism to pour. As a performer, you constantly think, what would the audience like? What would the viewer want to see, the listener to hear? But at the same time, you need to value what you want to put out there for yourself. And I think that that's really, really important to highlight. That incredible challenge with balancing, making your music something that consumers want versus making your music art and expression. And, I think it's really hard as a creator to not get lost in, you know, making your art a product and making your art content. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember keep that line, remember the difference between those things.
Exactly. And since music is so, objective, like it's hard to create music for yourself, but then also like create music for other people. And I think a lot of like, pop stars or, indie rock bands get criticized for, selling out. And not being, true and authentic to their roots and sort of just playing for the masses. But it is really hard as an artist to, like you said, create content for yourself, but then also for everyone else too. And it's hard to balance that. And our last question that we asked was, what are some goals you have as a youth and upcoming artist? I feel like it's important as an artist to set those goals for yourself, but making sure they're realistic, making it, not super, out there like in a fantasy world. But I think it's important to really just ground yourself in goals that you set.
So Jack Frost, he said, my biggest goal is honestly just to make a living doing what I love, since music has been my passion my whole life. I think that's really admirable. I think it's, the best thing to be able to live by doing something that is important to you and makes you feel fulfilled.
For sure. Aliana Gray's response was, as a youth, my goal is to be able to make a living for myself and inspire others. I hope that my walk will make things easier for other young Black girls. And I think that last part is especially important just because, we all need a role model to look up to. And I love that Aliana is sort of has that desire to really inspire other people, especially younger Black girls who may not really have the drive to be pushed into the music scene. But I think it's just really admirable that she's trying to set that example.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Chloe said that their main goal right now was releasing their own stuff. She said it feels like a tangible accomplishment to like have something on Spotify I can send to my grandparents and be like, yeah, I made that. And I think that's really cool to be able to take pride in your own work and to, have the opportunity to show it off and have it heard. And I think that's one of the things that's great about the digital age and the rise of, people like independent production and people creating music by themselves, is you don't need to sign with a record company to get your music out there where people can hear it. You can just, you can go record your music in whatever, space you have available, and you can put it out there and you can have people hear it and you can show it to people and you can be proud of it and you can share it. And I love that. I love that that's an opportunity that young artists have now that they might not have had, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I've been wanting to listen to Chloe's stuff, but it's not available anywhere. So I really hope she's successful with releasing her music, and I can't wait to just really listen to it. I've been waiting. And lastly, Knight's goal as a youth artist was to leave a mark and express what I've always stayed quiet about. And I think music is really a great outlet for people to express what they've stayed quiet about. It's a way for them to release all their, inner thoughts and channel it through great and beautiful art.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we do any performing arts, right? And any art in general. It's about communication and communicating things that we can't always say in words. And I think it's really, really significant and really profound to have these things be highlighted as opportunities to communicate these things that maybe we don't have the words to say, or we don't feel comfortable putting into words, right? We can put it out in music and in other forms of art. And that's a way to, have a healthy emotional expression.
For sure. Now we're just going to talk about some artists that we admire in our local and our youth, and just are very inspiring to listen to. One of those artists is Puddles of Dust. They make very pretty like pop rock music. I listened to some of their demos on SoundCloud, and it's really inspiring just because demos are always fun to listen to, and I'm really excited to hear more of their work.
Yeah. I listened to their song Icarus. For some reason, sort of immediately reminds me of the Beatles, like specifically the guitar in the very beginning of that song. And as it moves into the song and it like shifts out of that.
Yeah.
But that was sort of what I was thinking when I first heard it. It's that song specifically. It starts out very spare, just guitar, bass, and then really forward vocals. And then it speeds up, adds drums and some harmonies. Gets it's very warm. I think I described it as blanket around you, looking out the window at the rain vibes.
I love that. That's oh my
Uh,
God.
Yeah.
Any song that can make me feel like that, like, love it. Another band that we listened to for this episode was Queen Chimera. And I have been listening to them for a while now. I heard their demo of a song called Have You Ever Heard of Radiohead? And I really love the demo. I actually kind of like the demo version more than the album version. And as a Radiohead fan, I appreciate sort of the ironic sentiment behind the whole song, kind of poking fun at like the pretentious, music fan stereotype, blah, blah, blah. But I love their sort of Riot Girl punk influence that they have, and especially with Riot Girl in Seattle, there's that big legacy there. So many Riot Girl bands like, Slater Kinney, Ratmobiles, Bikini Kill, all coming from sort of the Pacific Northwest. There's that big influence here, and I love that Queen Chimera is sort of carrying that on.
Yeah, no, it's got the really strong, fun punk rock vibes. I remember when I was first listening to them, I love this band. I'd not really been very aware of them before, listening to them to prepare for this episode, but I just immediately I was like, oh, this is music I want to listen to. It's got crunchy harmonies. I love it. And it's, there's angst in the vocals. Like, it's really like, you can feel the emotion there. They are telling a story. They're punching something out. I definitely am going to go home and listen to more of their music after this.
For sure. I love that sort of punk and Riot Girl energy that they bring. Another artist that we listened to in preparation for this episode is an artist called Truitt. He is one of my classmates' brother. His stuff is pretty well produced, I would say. Songs like Panic Attack and Tear Me Down were sort of standouts to me. They were sort of, hazy and, I don't want to use dreamlike because we've used that word a lot throughout this episode, but very dreamlike, and got more of like a modern pop, hip hop feel to it.
Yeah, I would say, there's definitely lots of echo. But it sounds like something that I'd hear on the radio. Like, it definitely has got that sort of modern pop kind of like bordering on hip hop ideas in it. It's really, right, there's not a lot of diction in the lyrics. It's focused a lot on just the notes and the harmonies and the energy. The music's a little whispery. It's, aching, right? There's that sad sort of like, right, that ache that's just sort of threaded through it that I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, lots of reverb for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can check out some of these artists' music through SoundCloud, Spotify, and we'll make sure to link some of their music in the description.
Yeah, check out our playlist. It'll be featuring these artists and more. And other than these artists, Olivia, what songs have you been listening to?
I have been listening to Charlie XCX. Okay, this is kind of ridiculous, but she's become probably my most listened to artist this year. I don't really know how that happened, just because my musical background isn't really rooted in like pop music. But for some reason she has this like appeal to her, which I'm just so drawn to. And I don't know, I really owe it to her for just like introducing me to all sorts of pop, more left field stuff that she kind of does, but then also just like really mainstream stuff that she does. I think her last record, she described it as like her sellout record, which I mean, she's very self-aware, so it's a joke, obviously, but very, very mainstream type of stuff, but only in a way that she can do it, compared to like her quarantine EP she put out, which is what I've been listening to a lot lately, How I'm Feeling Now, which, you know, I go back and I listen to it, I'm like, it really did capture that frantic vibe of quarantine. She just wanted to go out and party and just you know, feel the, I think there's a lyric where it's like, I want to feel the heat from all the bodies, you know, in some party or something like that. But I'm just like, wow, like thinking back to COVID, I'm like, God, that was such a weird time. And that record sort of just captured literally how she's feeling now. But yeah, I've been listening to a lot of her. I'm, again, not really sure how she became my most listened to artist, but not complaining. I love her stuff. And yeah. But what about you? What have you been listening to?
I've been listening to, this is gonna be silly. I've been listening to a lot of Elvis. Because we're in my IB music class, we're going through some of, you know, the more recent music history right now, and so we're sort of like going through like the transition into more digital music and like how, you know, like you've got an electronic not necessarily digital, but even like electronic music, you know, like that sort of period of time where you start having electric guitar and then electric bass, and so you start introducing keyboard, and then you get things like the synthesizer, you know, over like, you know, a few decades. And so we spent a lot of time focusing on Elvis Presley and how he, you know, sort of changed, you know, the genre, and, you know, especially, right, like everybody knows about, right, Elvis's pelvis, his whole thing with the dancing that was scandalous. But it's just made me like go and like actually properly listen to his music for the first time, because it's, you know, like suddenly I'm thinking about like, how does this actually sound? Like, what must have this been like in context at the time? Versus like, I feel like, you know, right, like, yeah, occasionally you'll hear something by Elvis on the radio, or you're like in a diner and they're playing them. And so like, you know, lots of Elvis songs, but I feel like you don't really ever think about them anymore in like the modern day. And so it's just really interesting to go back and listen and actually properly think about it as music instead of just background noise. And it's been really interesting. Hound Dog is a blues song. I never realized that. Yeah, but I've, you know, weird time, weird place with my music listening habits, but that's where I'm at the moment.
I mean, they don't call him the king for nothing, honestly. He, like, his influence is very widespread, and I love that sort of we're able to track, you know, how one artist's sound from the past has sort of trickled down over decades into something completely different, you know, and he definitely kind of revolutionized rock and roll as we know it. And I know I've never really like sat down and listened to his stuff, but I'm sure like listening to it in the context of like, what would this sound like if I was a teenager in like the 50s, like compared to now, where I'm just like, oh, I've heard so many different types of music, like this is nothing really new. But going back, like trying to transport my mind back then, I'm just like, I bet it was mind-blowing. You know. So yeah, that's really interesting to listen to. But yeah, so that is a wrap for this month's Tap.
The music you're hearing in this episode is called Periwinkle by Totem Star artist Aliana Gray, as well as, you know, a lot of the other music clips that we've played, including more by Aliana Gray.
Yeah. We'd like to thank Grant Vu for editing this episode.
We want to thank the Vera Project for welcoming us into their space, and Ground Zero Radio for their support in the production of this podcast.
Finally, huge thank yous to our off-mic teammates, Xandra and Josh, and all the other folks at TeenTix whose work makes this podcast possible.
You've been listening to the TeenTix Arts Podcast, uplifting youth voices and artists in the local music scene through access to education and critical discussion.